The water was black as death, and Judge Catherine Sterling was about to die in it. 24 hours before she would hold a man's life in her hands, she was drowning in the merciless surge of Hurricane Elena, her BMW submerged beneath 8 feet of floodwater, her lungs burning as consciousness slipped away like sand through desperate fingers. Above her, the storm screamed with the fury of nature unleashed, but beneath the surface there was only silence. Cold, final silence. She had exactly 37 seconds of air left in her lungs when she felt the hands grab her shoulders. Powerful hands, determined hands. The hands of a man who had already lost everything and refused to lose one more life on his watch. Marcus Rivera had been driving through the evacuation zone for one reason only: to save his daughter Emma's stuffed elephant from their flooded apartment before Child Protective Services used his abandonment of the child's belongings as one more strike against him in tomorrow's custody hearing. He had 48 hours before a judge would decide whether the 8-year-old girl sleeping safely at his sister's house would ever come home to him again. He never expected to pull a drowning woman from the jaws of death. He certainly never expected that woman to be the judge who would seal his fate. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe. Drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. I love hearing from you. The courthouse summons had been burning a hole in Marcus's jacket pocket for 3 weeks. Tomorrow, October 15th, 9 a.m. sharp. Family Court Division. The Honorable Judge Catherine Sterling presiding. The words had become a mantra of terror, repeating in his mind every sleepless night. Judge Catherine Sterling, the woman who would decide whether his daughter Emma would remain in foster care or come home where she belonged. Marcus had researched her obsessively, 42 years old. Harvard Law School graduate, 15 years on the bench, known for her brilliance, her precision, and her complete intolerance for parents who failed to meet her impossibly high standards. The legal blogs called her the Iron Judge, fair but merciless, especially when children were involved. She had never reversed a CPS recommendation, not once in 15 years. Emma had been removed from his custody 6 months ago after a neighbor reported seeing her playing alone in their apartment building's courtyard while Marcus worked his evening shift at the warehouse. 8 years old, she had been building fairy houses out of twigs and fallen leaves, humming to herself in the golden afternoon light, completely safe within the gated community where they lived. But the social worker had written unsupervised child, negligent parent in her report, and suddenly Marcus was fighting the most important battle of his life, with one hand tied behind his back. His lawyer was overworked and underpaid. His ex-wife, Sarah, had disappeared to California 3 years ago, leaving nothing but a note and unpaid bills. His job at the warehouse barely covered rent and legal fees, leaving no money for the parenting classes, therapy sessions, and supervised visits the court demanded. Tomorrow morning, Judge Catherine Sterling would review his case file and decide his future. The thought made his stomach twist with an anxiety so sharp it felt like physical pain. That's why he was here, driving through the mandatory evacuation zone as Hurricane Elena made landfall. The storm had come faster than anyone expected, turning from a Category 2 to a Category 4 in less than 12 hours. The entire coastal district had been ordered to evacuate by 6 p.m. It was now 8:15 and the roads were supposed to be empty, but Marcus couldn't leave. Not without Mr. Peanuts. Emma's stuffed elephant had been with her since birth. Faded gray fabric worn soft by countless nights of cuddling, one ear chewed to tatters during her teething phase, button eyes that had been re-stitched so many times they looked like tiny asterisks. When the social workers had taken Emma away, she had screamed for Mr. Peanuts until her voice gave out. They wouldn't let Marcus go back for the toy, something about evidence preservation and maintaining boundaries. For 6 months, Emma had asked about Mr. Peanuts during every supervised visit. Where was he? Was he lonely? Was he scared? Marcus had promised every single week that he would bring Mr. Peanuts home. Tomorrow's hearing would likely be his last chance. If Judge Sterling ruled against him, Emma would be placed for adoption. Some new family would love her, would give her advantages Marcus never could. They would probably buy her a new stuffed animal, something clean and whole and unstained by poverty. But she didn't want a new elephant. She wanted Mr. Peanuts, and Marcus had sworn on his mother's grave that he would never break another promise to his daughter. His ancient Honda Civic struggled against the wind as he turned onto Riverside Drive. The street was already flooding, brown water rushing past storm drains that couldn't keep up with the deluge. His apartment complex sat on slightly higher ground. He might have 10 minutes before the water got too deep. The rain hammered his windshield with such violence that his wipers couldn't keep up. He could barely see 5 feet ahead, navigating by memory and instinct. Streetlights flickered and went dark. A tree branch crashed onto his hood with a sound like thunder. Marcus pressed forward. For Emma, he would drive through hell itself. He was 3 blocks from home when he saw the car. A black BMW sedan sat tilted at an impossible angle, its front end submerged in a drainage ditch that had become a raging torrent. The vehicle's hazard lights blinked weakly beneath the dark water like dying stars. Marcus slammed on his brakes, skidding to a stop on the flooded asphalt. He could see someone inside the car, a figure pressed against the rear window, trapped as the vehicle filled with water. Every instinct screamed at him to keep driving. The evacuation order was in effect for a reason. Emergency responders weren't even operating in these conditions. Getting out of his car meant risking his life for a stranger, and Emma needed him alive more than anyone needed him to be a hero. But the figure in the car was moving weakly, hands pressed against the glass in a universal gesture of desperation. Someone's mother, daughter, sister, someone who wanted to live. Marcus thought of Emma's face the last time he'd seen her, pressed against the social worker's car window as they drove her away to foster care. The way she had looked at him with complete trust, believing without question that Daddy would fix this, that Daddy would bring her home. He couldn't save his daughter from the system that was tearing them apart, but maybe he could save someone else's daughter from drowning. Marcus yanked off his jacket and shoes, took the deepest breath of his life, and dove into the black water. The current was stronger than he'd expected, immediately pulling him downstream. The water was ice cold despite the summer storm, shocking his system and making his muscles seize. He fought against the flow, swimming hard toward the BMW, his lungs already burning. The car was sinking fast. Water poured through the broken front windshield, and Marcus could see the trapped person's movements becoming more frantic, more desperate. He reached the vehicle just as the rear window disappeared beneath the surface. He dove down, his eyes stinging from the murky water. Inside the car, he could make out a woman with dark hair, her business suit floating around her like seaweed. She was conscious but weakening, her movements growing sluggish as her oxygen ran out. Marcus grabbed the door handle and pulled. Nothing. The water pressure held it shut like a giant fist. He surfaced, gasped for air, and dove again. This time he swam to the broken windshield, squeezing through the jagged opening and cutting his shoulders on the glass. The woman's eyes met his through the dark water, wide, terrified, but still alert, still fighting. She was older than he'd thought, maybe early 40s, with sharp features and silver threading through her dark hair. Even half drowned, there was something commanding about her presence, something that spoke of authority and intelligence. Marcus grabbed her around the waist and pulled her toward the windshield. She helped as much as she could, kicking weakly as he dragged her through the opening. His lungs were screaming for air, black spots dancing at the edges of his vision. They broke the surface together, both gasping and choking. The current immediately grabbed them, sweeping them downstream toward an overpass where the water was calmer. Marcus locked his arm around the woman's chest and swam hard for the concrete embankment, fighting the current that wanted to drag them both under. His feet finally touched bottom in the shallow water beneath the bridge. He hauled the woman up onto the muddy bank, both of them collapsing onto the wet concrete, coughing up dirty water and gulping precious air. "Are you hurt?" Marcus asked when he could finally speak. The woman shook her head, still catching her breath. Her business suit was ruined, her carefully styled hair plastered to her skull, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "I don't think so, just shaken up." "What's your name?" "Catherine," she said after a moment's hesitation. "Catherine Sterling." Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Judge Catherine Sterling, the woman who would decide Emma's fate in less than 12 hours, was sitting beside him, shivering and vulnerable, alive only because he had risked his life to save her. "I'm Marcus," he said, his voice oddly steady despite the chaos in his mind. "Marcus Rivera." She looked at him more closely then, water dripping from her hair, and something flickered in her expression. Recognition, confusion, he couldn't tell. "Thank you," she said simply. "You saved my life." Marcus nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Above them the storm raged with undiminished fury. Around them the floodwaters continued rising. Tomorrow this woman would hold his future in her hands. Tonight he had held her life in his. The irony was so sharp it nearly took his breath away. After 6 months of legal battles, after countless nights lying awake, wondering what Judge Catherine Sterling was like, whether she would see him as a loving father or just another deadbeat dad, here she was, human, vulnerable, grateful. "We need to get out of here," Catherine said, struggling to her feet. "The water's still rising." Marcus helped her up, his mind racing. Should he tell her who he was? Should he mention tomorrow's hearing? Would she recuse herself if she knew? Would that help or hurt his case? "My car's up the street," he said instead, "if it's still running." They climbed up the embankment together, Catherine's expensive heels squelching in the mud. In the distance they could hear the wail of emergency sirens, but the sound seemed impossibly far away. Marcus's Honda was still where he'd left it, engine running, headlights cutting through the rain. He helped Catherine into the passenger seat, noting how she moved with quiet dignity despite being soaked and shaken. "Where can I take you?" he asked, sliding behind the wheel. "The courthouse," she said automatically, then caught herself. "No, that's ridiculous. It's probably flooded too. My house is in Riverside Heights, but if the roads are closed—" "I know a back way," Marcus said. He knew the area well. He'd driven past her neighborhood countless times, wondering what it was like to live in houses that cost more than he'd make in a lifetime. As they drove through the flooded streets, Catherine was quiet, staring out the window at the devastation. Downed power lines sparked in the water. Entire trees had been uprooted. Cars sat abandoned in intersections, their owners long gone to safety. "You didn't have to stop," she said suddenly. "You could have been killed." Marcus kept his eyes on the road. Someone needed help. Most people would have kept driving. "Maybe, but I have a daughter. I'd want someone to help her if she was in trouble." Catherine turned to look at him, something unreadable in her expression. "How old is she?" 8. The word came out rough, weighted with all his love and fear and desperation. "That's a good age. Old enough to be independent, young enough to still need you." Marcus's hands tightened on the steering wheel. If only she knew how much Emma still needed him, how lost she was without her father, how the foster system was slowly breaking down the bright, joyful little girl she'd been. They reached Riverside Heights 20 minutes later. The exclusive neighborhood sat on higher ground, its mansion-sized houses untouched by the flooding. Catherine directed him to a two-story colonial with a circular driveway, the kind of home Marcus had cleaned windows for during his college years. "Thank you," she said again as he pulled up to the front door. "I don't know how to repay you for what you did tonight." "You don't owe me anything," Marcus said, meaning it. "I'm just glad you're safe." Catherine hesitated, her hand on the door handle. "Marcus, I feel like I should know you from somewhere. Have we met before?" Marcus's heart hammered against his ribs. This was his chance. He could tell her everything, about Emma, about tomorrow's hearing, about how the woman he'd just saved would soon hold his family's future in her hands. But something held him back. Maybe it was the vulnerability in her eyes, the way she was looking at him with genuine gratitude instead of judicial distance. Maybe it was the fear that knowing would change everything, would transform him from a hero back into just another case file. "I don't think so," he said quietly. "But I hope everything works out for you, Catherine." She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her all evening. "Take care of yourself, Marcus, and that daughter of yours." She got out of the car and ran to her front door, fishing keys from her waterlogged purse. Marcus watched until she was safely inside, lights coming on in the windows of her perfect house. Then he drove home through the dying storm to rescue a stuffed elephant and prepare for the most important day of his life. Neither of them slept that night. Catherine sat in her study, wrapped in a warm robe, reviewing case files for tomorrow's docket, while Hurricane Elena blew herself out against the coast. Every few minutes she found herself thinking about the man who had saved her life. Marcus Rivera. There was something about his name that tugged at her memory, something familiar she couldn't quite place. She had built her career on preparation, on knowing every detail of every case before she entered her courtroom. But tonight her mind kept drifting to kind eyes and strong hands, to a man who had risked everything to save a stranger. Marcus sat in his empty apartment, Mr. Peanuts clutched in his hands, watching the clock count down the hours until 9 a.m. He had retrieved the elephant from his flooded bedroom, along with a photograph of Emma's last birthday and the letter she had written him from foster care, decorated with careful drawings of hearts and flowers. In 6 hours he would walk into Family Court Division and face Judge Catherine Sterling. The woman whose life he had saved would decide whether his daughter came home. The woman who had looked at him with gratitude and warmth would review his case file and see only his failures, his poverty, his inability to provide the life Emma deserved. The storm had passed, leaving the city battered but still standing. Tomorrow would bring sunshine and the slow work of rebuilding. For Marcus Rivera and Catherine Sterling, tomorrow would bring a reckoning neither of them could have imagined. In a courtroom where justice was supposed to be blind, two strangers who had met in the darkness of a hurricane would discover that sometimes the most important decisions are made not with gavels and law books, but with the human heart. The scales of justice were about to be measured not in legal precedent, but in the weight of a father's love and a judge's awakening conscience. And somewhere between them, a little girl waited to come home, clutching a foster family's generic teddy bear and dreaming of the elephant she had lost. The stage was set, the storm had passed, and tomorrow everything would change. The Suffolk County Family Court building stood like a monument to broken dreams, its gray stone facade weathered by decades of tears and legal battles. At 8:45 a.m., exactly 15 minutes before his life would be decided, Marcus Rivera sat on a wooden bench in the hallway outside courtroom 3B, clutching Mr. Peanut so tightly his knuckles had gone white. He had changed clothes 3 times that morning, finally settling on his only suit, a navy blue hand-me-down from his brother-in-law that was slightly too big in the shoulders. His court-appointed lawyer, Jennifer Walsh, sat beside him reviewing files with the distracted air of someone managing too many cases with too little time. "Remember," Jennifer said without looking up from her papers, "be respectful, be brief, and don't volunteer information unless asked. Judge Sterling runs a tight courtroom. She doesn't appreciate dramatic speeches or emotional appeals." Marcus nodded, though his throat felt too tight to speak. Judge Sterling. Catherine. The woman whose life he had saved 12 hours ago, who had looked at him with gratitude and warmth, who had no idea she was about to rule on the most important case of his life. All night he had wrestled with whether to tell Jennifer about the rescue, but every scenario ended the same way. Catherine would be forced to recuse herself, and his case would go to Judge Morrison, whose reputation for splitting up families was even worse than Catherine's. At least with Catherine he had hope. With Morrison, Emma would be lost forever. So Marcus had made the most difficult decision of his life. He would walk into that courtroom and face the woman he had saved, and he would say nothing. He would let justice take its course, even if that justice came from the hands of someone who owed him a debt she didn't even know existed. "Rivera versus Child Protective Services," the bailiff called. "All parties please enter the courtroom." Marcus's legs felt like water as he stood. Jennifer gathered her files and walked toward the heavy oak doors, her heels clicking against the marble floor with the sound of approaching judgment. Marcus followed, Mr. Peanuts hidden inside his jacket, the soft fabric pressed against his racing heart. The courtroom was smaller than he'd expected, all dark wood and formal dignity. Fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across empty gallery benches. At the front of the room, behind an imposing desk that seemed designed to intimidate, sat an empty chair draped in black judicial robes. On the opposite side of the courtroom, the CPS attorney was already arranging her papers. Linda Morrison, no relation to the judge, was a thin woman with steel-gray hair and the kind of smile that never reached her eyes. She had built her career on removing children from homes she deemed unfit, and she was very good at her job. Marcus took his seat at the defendant's table, his hands shaking despite his best efforts to stay calm. Behind him, the gallery was mostly empty, except for his sister Rosa, who had taken time off work to be here. Emma was in school, safely unaware that her future was being decided in this cold, impersonal room. "All rise," the bailiff announced, the Honorable Judge Catherine Sterling presiding. The side door opened and Catherine emerged in her black robes, her dark hair pinned back in a severe bun, her expression composed and professional. She moved with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to being the most powerful person in any room. But Marcus saw something else. A small bandage on her left hand where she had cut it on broken glass. A barely perceptible stiffness in her posture that suggested muscles still sore from fighting floodwaters. The faintest shadow under her eyes that spoke of a sleepless night. She settled into her chair, opened the case file, and looked up at the assembled parties. Her gaze swept across the courtroom with practiced efficiency. The CPS attorney, Jennifer Walsh, the court reporter, the bailiff. And then her eyes met Marcus's. The moment of recognition was so subtle that anyone else would have missed it. A tiny intake of breath, a momentary widening of her dark eyes. The slightest hesitation before she looked down at her papers, she knew. Catherine's hands trembled almost imperceptibly as she reviewed the file. Rivera versus Child Protective Services. Petition for termination of parental rights. Father, Marcus Antonio Rivera, age 34, employed at Harrison Warehouse, single parent. Child, Emma Sophia Rivera, age 8, currently in foster care placement. The same Marcus Rivera who had risked his life to pull her from a sinking car. The same man who had spoken with such love about his 8-year-old daughter. The same gentle, selfless stranger who had saved her life without expecting anything in return. Catherine had built her career on objectivity, on the principle that personal feelings had no place in a courtroom. She had presided over thousands of cases, made countless decisions that changed families forever, always maintaining the emotional distance necessary to see clearly. But now, looking at the man who had saved her life sitting at the defendant's table with hope and terror written across his face, objectivity felt like a luxury she could no longer afford. Every instinct told her to recuse herself. The ethical guidelines were clear. Judges must avoid any appearance of bias or conflict of interest. She owed Marcus Rivera a debt that could never be repaid. How could she possibly rule impartially on his case? But Catherine also knew what recusal would mean. Judge Morrison would take over, and Morrison had never met a family he couldn't break apart. Emma Rivera would be placed for adoption within a month, and Marcus would lose his daughter forever. The thought made Catherine's chest tighten with something that felt dangerously close to panic. She looked at Marcus again, really looked at him this time, seeing past the cheap suit and nervous energy to the man beneath. The same hands that had pulled her from drowning water were now clasped tightly in his lap. The same eyes that had met hers with determination in the darkness now watched her with desperate hope. He hadn't told anyone. She was certain of it. If his lawyer knew about the rescue, she would have filed for recusal immediately. Marcus was protecting her, even though it might cost him everything. Catherine made a decision that went against 15 years of judicial training. She would not recuse herself. She would hear this case, review the evidence, and make a ruling based on what was best for Emma Rivera. And if that decision happened to be influenced by her knowledge of Marcus's character, knowledge gained not from case files but from watching him risk his life for a stranger, then perhaps that was simply justice finding a way to work as it should. "This court is now in session," Catherine said, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. "We are here to review the petition filed by Child Protective Services for termination of parental rights in the matter of Emma Sophia Rivera. Ms. Morrison, please present your case." Linda Morrison rose with the confidence of someone who had never lost a termination hearing. "Thank you, Your Honor. The state contends that Marcus Rivera, despite his good intentions, is unable to provide adequate care for his minor daughter. The evidence will show a pattern of neglect, unsafe living conditions, and failure to prioritize the child's welfare." Marcus felt his heart sink as Morrison began her methodical destruction of his character. She painted a picture of a father too poor, too overwhelmed, too selfish to put his daughter first. The incident that had led to Emma's removal, leaving her alone in the courtyard while he worked, became abandonment. His second job at the warehouse became prioritizing income over parenting. His small apartment became substandard housing, unfit for a growing child. Furthermore, Morrison continued, "Mr. Rivera has consistently failed to meet the court's requirements for family reunification. He missed 2 parenting classes due to work conflicts. He was late to 3 supervised visits. He has been unable to secure stable housing in an appropriate neighborhood or demonstrate sufficient income to meet the child's needs." Each accusation landed like a physical blow. Marcus wanted to stand up, to explain that the parenting classes conflicted with his work schedule, and missing them meant losing pay they couldn't afford, that he was late to visits because the bus broke down and he had no car, that his apartment might be small but it was clean and filled with love. But Jennifer had warned him to stay silent, to let her handle the defense. So Marcus sat there and watched his life be dismantled piece by piece, his failures catalogued and quantified, until he barely recognized himself in the portrait being painted. "The state's position is clear," Morrison concluded. "While Mr. Rivera may love his daughter, love alone is not sufficient. Emma Rivera deserves a stable home with adequate resources and parents who can prioritize her needs. The state therefore requests immediate termination of parental rights and clearance for adoption placement. Morrison sat down, her case presented with surgical precision. Marcus felt like he was drowning all over again, except this time there was no one to pull him to safety. Jennifer Walsh rose to present the defense, and Catherine found herself listening with an attention that went far beyond professional duty. She wanted to hear Marcus's story, needed to understand how the man who had saved her life had ended up here, fighting for his family. "Your Honor," Jennifer began, "the defense contends that Marcus Rivera is a devoted father whose only crime is being poor in a system that punishes poverty. Mr. Rivera works 2 jobs, not to avoid parenting but to provide for his daughter. He lives in a small apartment, not because he doesn't care, but because it's what he can afford while paying for Emma's medical needs." Medical needs? Catherine glanced at the file, scanning for details she had missed. Emma Rivera, chronic asthma, multiple emergency room visits, prescribed inhaler medication. She thought of Marcus's words the night before. "I have a daughter. I'd want someone to help her if she was in trouble." Mr. Rivera has never missed a child support payment, never failed to provide medical care, never put Emma in actual danger, Jennifer continued. The incident that led to removal occurred when Mr. Rivera briefly stepped inside to take a work call while Emma played in a secured courtyard area. She was never alone, never unsupervised, never at risk. Yet CPS used this single incident to justify removal and has since created an impossible standard for reunification. Catherine listened as Jennifer laid out the facts that Morrison had omitted. Marcus's perfect employment record, his completion of all required counseling, his consistent presence at every medical appointment, every school conference, every milestone in Emma's life. The testimony of teachers who described Emma as happy, healthy, and clearly loved. Mr. Rivera is here today not because he failed as a father, but because the system failed him, Jennifer said. He deserves the chance to prove that love, dedication, and hard work are worth more than wealth when it comes to raising a child. When Jennifer sat down, Catherine felt the weight of decision settling on her shoulders like a physical burden. 2 lawyers had presented 2 versions of the same man, and the truth lay somewhere in between. But Catherine had seen a 3rd version, the man who had dove into deadly floodwaters to save a stranger, who had spoken of his daughter with pure love, who had asked for nothing in return for the greatest gift anyone could give. "Mr. Rivera," Catherine said, her voice carefully neutral, "please approach the bench." Marcus rose on unsteady legs, his heart hammering so hard he was sure everyone could hear it. He walked to the front of the courtroom, stopping just below Catherine's elevated desk, close enough to see the small scar on her chin from where she had hit the car window the night before. "Mr. Rivera, I want to hear from you directly. In your own words, tell me why you believe Emma should remain in your custody." The question hung in the air like a lifeline. Marcus looked up at Catherine, at the woman whose life he had saved, who now held his future in her hands, and chose his words carefully. "Your Honor, Emma is everything to me. She's the reason I get up every morning, the reason I work 2 jobs, the reason I fight so hard to be better. I know our apartment is small. I know I don't have money for fancy clothes or expensive toys, but I love her with everything I have." His voice cracked slightly, but he pressed on. "Emma has asthma. When she was 5, she had an attack so severe they thought we might lose her. I sat by her hospital bed for 3 days straight, holding her hand, reading her stories, promising her I'd never leave her alone. That's the kind of father I am, the kind who shows up, the kind who stays." Catherine felt tears threatening behind her professional mask. In Marcus's words, she heard the echo of the night before, his quiet strength, his instinctive protectiveness, his capacity for selfless love. I'm not perfect, Marcus continued. I've made mistakes. I work too much sometimes because I have to, not because I want to. But Emma knows she's loved. She knows she's safe. She knows that no matter what happens, her daddy will fight for her. He reached inside his jacket and pulled out Mr. Peanuts, the worn gray elephant looking impossibly small in his large hands. This is Mr. Peanuts. Emma's had him since she was a baby. When they took her away, she cried for him every night. The Foster family bought her new toys, but she just wanted this old elephant because it smells like home. Catherine stared at the stuffed animal, something breaking open inside her chest. She thought of the storm, of Marcus driving through floodwaters not for glory or recognition, but for love, for the promise he had made to a little girl who needed her elephant more than anything money could buy. Mr. Rivera, Catherine said quietly, if I were to grant reunification, what assurances can you give this court that Emma's welfare will be protected? I'll do whatever it takes, Marcus said without hesitation. More parenting classes, supervised visits, surprise inspections, anything. I just want my daughter home. I just want the chance to be her father again. Catherine nodded, her decision crystallizing with each word he spoke. She looked out at the courtroom, at Linda Morrison with her stack of damning evidence, at Jennifer Walsh, who had fought harder than Marcus could afford to pay her for, at Rosa in the gallery with tears streaming down her face, and she thought about justice, real justice, not the cold calculation of bureaucratic requirements, but the kind that recognized that some bonds were sacred, some love was irreplaceable, some families were worth fighting for. If you're hooked on this story, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an upload. Your support means everything and helps me bring you more emotional stories like this one. This court will recess for 1 hour while I review all evidence and testimony, Catherine announced. We will reconvene at 2 p.m. for my ruling. She rose and disappeared into her chambers, leaving Marcus standing alone at the front of the courtroom, Mr. Peanuts clutched in his hands, his future hanging in the balance. In her chambers, Catherine sat with the Rivera file spread across her desk, but she wasn't reading the reports anymore. Instead, she was remembering the feeling of drowning, of her lungs burning and consciousness fading, of thinking she would never see another sunrise. And she was remembering the hands that had pulled her from that darkness, strong, determined hands that belonged to a man who risked everything to save a stranger. The same hands that now held a stuffed elephant with infinite tenderness. Marcus Rivera wasn't perfect. He was poor, overwhelmed, struggling against a system designed to defeat him, but he was also brave, selfless, and filled with the kind of love that couldn't be measured in case files or income statements. More importantly, he was Emma's father, and sometimes that was the only qualification that truly mattered. Catherine reached for her pen and began writing her decision. Outside, Hurricane Elena had left the city battered but still standing. Inside this courthouse, she was about to set off a different kind of storm, one that would send ripples of hope through a broken family and remind everyone present that justice at its best was simply love dressed up in legal robes. The hour passed like a lifetime. At exactly 2 p.m., Catherine returned to the courtroom, her decision written in precise legal language, but born from the most human part of her heart. Marcus Rivera was about to learn that sometimes, when you save a life, that life finds a way to save you in return. And sometimes the most important rulings aren't made in courtrooms at all, but in the dark waters of a hurricane, where strangers become heroes and heroes become family. The scales of justice were about to tip toward mercy, and a little girl named Emma was finally going home. At exactly 2 p.m., Catherine Sterling walked back into the courtroom carrying more than just a legal decision. She carried the weight of a life saved, a family's future, and the knowledge that sometimes justice required a judge to remember she was human first. The courtroom fell silent as she took her seat. Marcus Rivera sat at the defendant's table, his hands folded so tightly his knuckles had gone white, Mr. Peanut still hidden inside his jacket like a talisman of hope. Behind him, his sister Rosa clutched a rosary, her lips moving in silent prayer. On the other side of the aisle, Linda Morrison arranged her papers with the confidence of someone who had never lost a termination case. In her experience, poor single fathers didn't win custody battles against the state. The system simply wasn't designed to accommodate love without resources. Catherine looked out at the assembled faces, each one representing a different vision of Emma Rivera's future. To Morrison, the 8-year-old girl was a case number, a child who deserved stability and resources above all else. To Jennifer Walsh, she was a symbol of systemic inequality, a victim of a system that punished poverty. To Rosa, she was a beloved niece who belonged with family. But to Marcus, Emma was everything, his reason for living, his motivation for becoming better, his heart walking around outside his body. Catherine had heard that love in his voice the night before when he spoke of wanting someone to help his daughter if she was in trouble. She had seen it in his willingness to risk his life during a hurricane to retrieve a worn stuffed elephant. And now she had to decide whether that love was enough. This court has reviewed all evidence and testimony in the matter of Emma Sophia Rivera, Catherine began, her voice carrying the formal authority of 15 years on the bench. This is never an easy decision, as it involves the welfare of a child and the fundamental rights of a parent. Marcus felt his heart stop beating. This was it, the moment that would determine whether he would tuck Emma into bed tonight or spend the rest of his life wondering what she looked like when she laughed. The state has presented evidence of Mr. Rivera's financial struggles, his demanding work schedule, and the incident that led to Emma's removal from his custody, Catherine continued. These are serious concerns that cannot be dismissed lightly. Marcus's hopes began to crumble. The formal language, the reference to serious concerns, it sounded like the prelude to defeat. He thought of Emma at school right now, probably sitting in math class, unaware that her future was being decided. He thought of the foster parents who had given her new toys and regular meals, who could provide things he never could. However, Catherine said, and that single word changed everything, the court must also consider the totality of the evidence, not just the incidents that brought us here. She opened the file, though she no longer needed to read from it. Every detail was burned into her memory. Marcus Rivera has worked 2 jobs for 8 years to provide for his daughter. He has never missed a child support payment, never failed to attend a medical appointment, never been absent when Emma needed him most. When his daughter was hospitalized with severe asthma at age 5, Mr. Rivera took unpaid leave from both jobs and remained at her bedside for 72 consecutive hours. Catherine's voice grew stronger, more confident. The defense has presented testimony from Emma's teachers, who describe her as a happy, well-adjusted child who speaks constantly of her father's love and support. Her pediatrician notes that despite financial constraints, Emma has received exemplary medical care, with Mr. Rivera following every treatment protocol precisely and seeking immediate help during asthma episodes. Marcus felt something stirring in his chest, not quite hope, but the possibility of hope. The court finds that the incident leading to Emma's removal, leaving her briefly unattended in a secured courtyard, was an isolated lapse in judgment, not a pattern of neglect. Mr. Rivera was responding to a work emergency while his daughter played safely in an area where other children regularly play unsupervised. Linda Morrison shifted uncomfortably in her chair. This wasn't going according to plan. Furthermore, Catherine continued, the court notes that Mr. Rivera has completed all required counseling, attended all supervised visits, and demonstrated his commitment to meeting any and all conditions for reunification. His inability to secure larger housing or higher paying employment is not evidence of inadequate parenting. It is evidence of economic inequality that affects millions of working families. Catherine paused, looking directly at Marcus for the first time since returning to the courtroom. In his eyes, she saw the same determination that had pulled her from drowning waters, the same strength that had driven him through a hurricane for his daughter's sake. The question before this court is not whether Mr. Rivera is wealthy enough to give Emma luxury, but whether he is capable enough to give her love, stability, and proper care. The evidence overwhelmingly supports the conclusion that he is. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. Around the courtroom he could hear Rosa sobbing quietly, Jennifer shuffling papers with barely contained excitement, Morrison muttering something to her assistant. Therefore, Catherine said, her voice ringing with finality, this court hereby dismisses the petition for termination of parental rights. Custody of Emma Sofia Rivera is restored to her father, Marcus Rivera, effective immediately. The gavel came down with a crack like thunder. Marcus collapsed forward onto the table, his whole body shaking with relief, so profound it felt like resurrection. He had won. Emma was coming home. After 6 months of legal battles, sleepless nights, and desperate fear, his daughter was finally coming home. Rosa rushed forward from the gallery, throwing her arms around her brother and sobbing into his shoulder. Jennifer Walsh gathered her papers with the satisfaction of a job well done, while across the aisle, Linda Morrison packed up in stony silence. But Catherine wasn't finished. "Mr. Rivera," she said, and Marcus looked up through tears he couldn't control. "Please approach the bench." Marcus stood on trembling legs and walked to the front of the courtroom, still not quite believing what had happened. Catherine leaned forward slightly, her voice dropping to a tone that wouldn't carry to the court reporter. "Mr. Rivera, this court is also ordering immediate family reunification services, including housing assistance, medical support, and job training programs. My clerk will provide you with all necessary paperwork and contacts." Marcus nodded, overwhelmed. "Thank you, Your Honor. I don't know how to thank you." Catherine's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "Take good care of Emma and Mr. Rivera." She paused. "Sometimes the system works the way it's supposed to. Sometimes justice finds a way." Their eyes met for one brief moment, judge and citizen, saved and savior, two people whose lives had intersected in the darkness of a storm and emerged into light. Marcus walked back to his table, where Jennifer was explaining the next steps for Emma's release from foster care. There would be paperwork, a transition period, counseling to help Emma readjust. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that tonight, for the first time in 6 months, he would tuck his daughter in her own bed, in her own room, where she belonged. As the courtroom emptied, Catherine remained at the bench, officially finishing her paperwork, but really just needing a moment to process what had happened. She had just made the most important decision of her judicial career, not because of its legal complexity, but because of its human cost. In 15 years on the bench, she had never let personal experience influence her rulings. She had prided herself on objectivity, on emotional distance, on treating every case as an abstract puzzle to be solved. But Marcus Rivera had changed that. Not because he had saved her life, though that debt would never be forgotten, but because he had reminded her that behind every case file was a real person with real love and real pain. She thought about the man who had risked his life in a hurricane, who had spoken of his daughter with such fierce tenderness, who had asked for nothing in return for the greatest gift anyone could give. That man deserved to be Emma's father. That man had earned the right to love his daughter without interference from a system that too often confused poverty with neglect. Catherine gathered her files and rose from the bench. In her chambers, she would write the formal order restoring custody, ensure all support services were properly arranged, and file the paperwork that would officially close the case. But first, she had one more thing to do. She pulled out her phone and sent a text to her assistant. Please research hurricane relief funds and emergency assistance programs. I want a comprehensive list on my desk by tomorrow morning. If the storm had taught her anything, it was that sometimes people needed help through no fault of their own, and sometimes the people with the power to help had an obligation to act. 3 hours later, Marcus stood outside Lincoln Elementary School, his hands shaking as he waited for the final bell. He had spent the afternoon at the Department of Children and Families, signing papers, meeting with caseworkers, and officially reclaiming custody of his daughter. Emma's foster parents had been kind but distant. They knew this day might come, and they had prepared for it by not getting too attached. But Marcus was attached. He had been attached from the moment Emma took her first breath, and no amount of legal separation could change that. The school doors opened, and children poured out like a breaking wave. Marcus scanned the crowd anxiously until he spotted her, a small girl with dark curls pulled back in pigtails, wearing a backpack covered with unicorn stickers. She was walking slowly, her head down, the way she had walked for months now. "Emma," Marcus called. She looked up, confused at first, then shocked. Her father wasn't supposed to be here. Her father only came for supervised visits at the family center. Her father wasn't allowed to pick her up from school. "Daddy?" she whispered. "Hey, baby girl," Marcus said, kneeling down as she ran toward him. "I'm here to take you home." Emma crashed into his arms with the force of 6 months of separation, 6 months of missing him, 6 months of wondering if he still loved her. She buried her face in his shoulder and sobbed. Not the quiet, controlled tears of a child who had learned not to make too much noise, but the raw, desperate crying of someone who had finally found safety. "Are you really here?" she asked between sobs. "Am I really coming home?" "You're really coming home," Marcus whispered, holding her so tightly he was afraid he might break her. "Forever and always. Daddy's never letting you go again." He reached into his jacket and pulled out Mr. Peanuts, watching Emma's face transform with joy, so pure it took his breath away. "Mr. Peanuts!" she cried, grabbing the worn elephant and hugging it to her chest. "I missed him so much, Daddy. I missed him and I missed you, and I thought maybe you forgot about me." "Never," Marcus said fiercely. "I could never forget about you. You're my whole world, Emma. You always have been." They stood there in the schoolyard, father and daughter reunited, while around them other families went about their ordinary Tuesday afternoon routines. But for Marcus and Emma, this was the most extraordinary day of their lives. As they walked to Rosa's car, Marcus still couldn't afford his own. Emma chattered nonstop about everything that had happened while they were apart. School, friends, the foster family's dog, the new book she was reading, but mostly she talked about coming home. "Can we make pancakes for dinner?" she asked. "The bear-shaped ones you make?" "We can make whatever you want," Marcus laughed. "Can we watch movies until really late?" "It's a school night, but I think we can make an exception." "Can Mr. Peanuts sleep in my bed again?" "Mr. Peanuts can sleep wherever he wants." Emma considered this seriously. "I think he wants to sleep with both of us tonight. He missed you too, Daddy." Marcus felt his eyes sting with fresh tears. "I think that sounds perfect." That evening, Catherine Sterling sat in her empty townhouse, eating takeout Chinese food and reviewing case files for tomorrow's docket. It was her usual routine: work until late, eat dinner alone, fall asleep on the couch with legal briefs scattered around her. But tonight felt different. Tonight she kept thinking about Marcus Rivera tucking his daughter into bed, about Emma falling asleep with Mr. Peanuts clutched in her arms, about a family made whole again. For 15 years, Catherine had told herself that emotional distance was necessary for good judgment. She had lived alone, worked alone, made decisions in isolation because she believed that was what justice required. But today had shown her something different. Today had shown her that sometimes the most just decision was the one that came from the heart. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number, the same number that had contacted her earlier about the hurricane relief funds. "Your Honor, this is Marcus Rivera. I hope it's appropriate to contact you. Emma wanted you to know that Mr. Peanuts said thank you. She also wanted me to tell you that you're her favorite judge ever, even though you're the only judge she's ever met. We'll never forget what you did for our family today. Thank you for bringing us home." Catherine stared at the message for a long time, something warm spreading through her chest. She typed back carefully, "Mr. Rivera, please tell Emma that she's very welcome and that Mr. Peanuts sounds like a very wise elephant. Take care of each other." She paused, then added, "And Marcus, thank you for reminding me why I became a judge in the first place. Some cases change the judge more than the judge changes the case." She sent the message and sat back, looking around her perfect, sterile house. For the first time in years, it felt too quiet, too empty, too much like a place where someone was hiding from life instead of living it. Tomorrow, she would start looking into those relief funds more seriously. She would find ways to help families like the Riveras before they ended up in her courtroom. She would remember that behind every case file was a real person with real hopes and real fears. And maybe, just maybe, she would start opening her own life to the possibility of connection, of messiness, of the kind of love that couldn't be contained in legal documents. 6 months later, Catherine was leaving the courthouse after another long day when she saw them. Marcus and Emma Rivera walking hand in hand down the front steps, both of them smiling. Marcus was wearing a better suit now, still not expensive, but newer, better fitting. Emma had grown taller, her hair longer, and she was carrying a school project that looked like a volcano. "Judge Sterling!" Emma called, breaking away from her father to run toward Catherine. "Emma," Catherine said, surprised by how genuinely happy she was to see them. "How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm great. Daddy got a promotion at work and we moved to a bigger apartment and I made the honor roll. And Mr. Peanuts learned how to do a backflip." Emma demonstrated with the elephant, making Catherine laugh. Marcus approached more slowly, that same gentle smile she remembered from the hurricane. "Your Honor, good to see you." "You too, Marcus. You both look wonderful." "We're doing really well," Marcus said. "The housing assistance program you connected us with made all the difference. Emma has her own room now, and I only work one job." "I'm so glad," Catherine said, and meant it completely. "Judge Sterling," Emma said seriously, "Daddy says you saved our family. Is that true?" Catherine knelt down to Emma's level, looking into eyes that sparkled with the confidence of a child who knew she was loved. "I think your daddy saved your family, sweetheart. I just helped a little bit." "Well, I made you something," Emma said, digging in her backpack and pulling out a drawing. It showed 3 figures holding hands, a tall man, a small girl, and a woman in a black robe. Above them, someone had written in careful letters, "My family and my hero judge." Catherine felt her throat tighten. "It's beautiful, Emma, thank you." "You can put it on your refrigerator," Emma suggested helpfully. "I will definitely put it on my refrigerator," Catherine promised. As they parted ways, Marcus and Emma heading home to their new apartment, Catherine to her slowly warming townhouse. Catherine thought about the night that had changed everything, a hurricane that had torn through the city, destroying some things and revealing others, storm waters that had nearly claimed her life but had ultimately led her to a deeper understanding of what it meant to serve justice. She thought about the man who had risked everything to save a stranger, who had taught her that sometimes the most important decisions weren't made in courtrooms but in moments of crisis when people showed who they truly were. That night, Catherine hung Emma's drawing on her refrigerator, right next to the contact information for 3 different family assistance programs she had helped establish. On her kitchen table sat applications for a volunteer program that provided legal advocacy for low-income families. The hurricane had passed, but its effects were still rippling outward. A judge had remembered her humanity, a father had reclaimed his daughter, and a family had been restored not just by legal decision, but by the recognition that love, messy, imperfect, determined love, was often the strongest foundation of all. Outside, the city hummed with ordinary life. Inside her home, for the first time in years, Catherine Sterling felt like she was truly living instead of just surviving. She picked up her phone and sent one more message. "Marcus, would you and Emma like to have dinner sometime? Nothing formal, just friends sharing a meal. Emma mentioned she likes bear-shaped pancakes, and I happen to make excellent pancakes." The response came quickly. "We'd love that. Emma wants to know if Mr. Peanuts can come too." Catherine smiled, typing back, "Mr. Peanuts is always welcome. Some storms destroy everything in their path, but sometimes, if you're very lucky, a storm can wash away the barriers between strangers and leave something beautiful in its wake. Sometimes a hurricane can bring people home, not just to houses but to each other. And sometimes the most important rescue happens not in dark waters but in the quiet moments afterward, when 2 people realize they've saved each other in ways they never expected. The scales of justice had found their balance, and 3 lives, a judge, a father, and a little girl, had discovered that family isn't always about blood or law or perfect circumstances. Sometimes family is about showing up in the storm, sometimes it's about taking the risk to help a stranger, and sometimes it's about recognizing that the person you save might be the one who ends up saving you. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you love this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.